They say royalty is eternal, unshakable, immutable, immune to the everyday turmoil that unravels ordinary families. But 5 minutes ago, something happened that might change that belief forever. Not with a crash, not with a scandal, not even with shouting, but with a single sentence from Prince William that landed like a quiet thunderclap across the British press room. Archie and Lilibet will no longer receive royal titles moving forward. The decision, made privately and unanimously, reflects irreparable damage done to the crown. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. No ceremony, no sympathy, no wiggle room, just fact. And just like that, the children born of the most controversial modern royal union, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, were erased from the royal line of honor. Not from the line of succession, no, but from the symbolic dignity that makes royalty royal. It's not the kind of announcement you expect from William. Calm, measured, fiercely private William. He doesn't make waves. He manages them. So why now? Why this? Why them? And more importantly, why him? Let's take a moment to sit with this, because if we rush past the weight of what's just happened, we'll miss the significance. This wasn't just a policy change. This was a declaration. A fracture turned formal. A silent war made visible. And for the first time in years, the crown spoke directly, not through palace aides, not via friends close to the family, and not hidden in the fog of PR spin. It came from the heir himself, the man next in line, the future king. That changes the stakes, because this isn't just about Meghan Markle anymore. It's about legacy, and whether or not hers, through her children, will be allowed to exist inside the institution she walked away from. But let me ask you something. If the children of Prince Harry, son of the late Princess Diana, can be quietly cut out, what does that say about the institution that raised him? And what does it say about the future William intends to build? Because make no mistake, this wasn't about Archie and Lilibet. This was about control, and maybe about something deeper, older, something the public has only ever seen glimpses of. In tightly edited interviews, body language breakdowns, and those rare unscripted seconds when the mask slips just enough to reveal real tension underneath. It's hard to ignore that this came now, just days after leaked documents reportedly showed Meghan and Harry pushing for their children to be addressed as Prince and Princess in future commercial endeavors. Harder still to ignore the rumor that King Charles was hesitant, not unwilling, that he was considering a symbolic compromise. A grandfather's olive branch. And then came William, the final voice, the vote. And now, the fracture is official. You might be wondering, why does this matter? Isn't this just more royal drama? Another chapter in a tired feud? Not this time. This time, the royals didn't just respond. They acted. They didn't just close the door. They bolted it. And the message to Meghan Markle is unmistakable. You may have married into the family, but your children will not inherit the crown. The language is careful, deliberate, irreparable damage. Not misunderstanding. Not tensions. Not even disagreement. Damage. As in a wound. One that cannot heal. Let that sink in. It's rare, almost unheard of, for the firm to use such emotive language in an official capacity. Even in the wake of Prince Andrew's catastrophic downfall, the messaging was restrained, almost diplomatic. But here, with Meghan, they made a choice, not of words, but of finality. And now, the world is left to piece together what really happened, behind closed doors, beneath gilded ceilings, inside rooms the public never sees. Who pushed for this? Who hesitated? And why was this decision made not during the Queen's reign, but now, under Charles, and seemingly led by William? Because timing matters. And this timing is brutal. Archie is only a child. Lilibet, a toddler. Their public footprint is minimal. They are, for all intents and purposes, innocent. But that innocence no longer protects them. Not in this system. Not anymore. And that raises a chilling question for anyone watching closely. If the royal family is willing to revoke titles from two children for the sins of their parents, what are they trying to protect themselves from? And perhaps more importantly, what are they trying to hide? Because that word again, damage, it doesn't sit easily. Damage implies exposure, weakness, risk. And risk, when it comes to monarchy, is managed in silence. Sealed documents, blacked out letters, strategic exiles. But once you involve the children, once you declare to the world that even they are not safe from consequence, you're playing a different game altogether. This isn't about decorum anymore. This is about erasure, about lineage, and about who gets to write history. And right now, William, for the first time, has taken the pen into his own hands. He is no longer the passive heir. He is no longer the peacemaker standing between his brother and his father. He is making decisions that shape the monarchy's next chapter. And by doing so, he's telling us something we weren't supposed to know. Something buried. Something that didn't just break trust. It broke the crown. But what was it? What exactly did Meghan and Harry do that made the royal family close ranks so completely? What truth are they not saying out loud? Not in the statement, not in the headlines, not even in the carefully leaked sources close to the palace. Because if you look closely at the language, something is missing. There is no mention of specific events. No direct reference to the Oprah interview. No allusion to the Netflix docuseries. Not even a nod to spare. Just irreparable damage. It's as if they're speaking in code. And perhaps they are. Because if they said it out loud, if they named it, they'd have to explain it. And maybe they can't. Or maybe they won't. Not yet. But the consequences are now visible. Archie and Lilibet, born into the House of Windsor, will grow up without titles, without status, and perhaps most importantly, without the shield of institutional legacy. And while some will applaud that, see it as a liberation from a toxic legacy, others will recognize the deeper strategy at play. This wasn't mercy. It was containment. But here's where it gets more complicated. Because there's growing evidence that this wasn't just a decision made in Buckingham Palace. It was voted on. A private vote. Among senior royals. Confirmed by William himself. Let that settle for a moment. Because that changes everything. We're not just dealing with Charles's cautious hand. Or William's cool assertion. This was a coordinated, deliberative act. An act that required silence, strategy, and consensus. And that means, at some point recently, the most senior members of the royal family sat in a private room and decided, unanimously or near unanimously, to cut off the bloodline of Diana's grandchildren. Why? And perhaps more hauntingly, what did they see that we haven't yet? The answer to that may not come from press releases. It might not even come from the palace. Because in moments like this, when the narrative seems tightly controlled, the truth often slips out through the cracks. Through whispers. Through silent exits. Through sudden moves that make sense only in hindsight. And that's what we'll explore next. Because behind William's calm exterior, behind the veil of family loyalty and public duty, lies a moment, a meeting, and a vote. One that may have finally broken whatever was left of the Windsor-Mountbatten alliance. And it all starts inside a room with no cameras, no press, and one empty chair. We'll go there next. Because what happened in that room? And who spoke last? Is where the true story begins. What exactly did Prince William say behind that podium? Not the exact words. We've all seen the quote by now. But what did he say? Because there's a difference between the official transcript and the quiet weight that hung in the air after. And it wasn't just the press who felt it. You could hear it in the stillness of the room. That dense silence that comes after someone crosses a line, not out of anger, but resolution. The kind of silence that usually follows a eulogy. Except this time, it wasn't a person being buried. It was a future. No fanfare. No grand declarations. Just Prince William standing in a Navy suit, formal but unremarkable, and delivering a statement so clean, so unadorned, it almost passed unnoticed in real time. Until the final sentence. There will be no titles extended to Archie and Lilibet moving forward. This decision has been made privately, by senior consensus, and reflects the need to preserve the integrity of the crown after what we now recognize as irreparable damage. No elaboration, no emotion, just punctuation. It felt surgical, and maybe that's what made it so chilling. Because this wasn't the William we're used to seeing. Not the smiling patron at a hospital opening. Not the steady-handed royal trying to hold fractured family bonds together in public. This was something else. This was a man delivering a verdict. And when he finished speaking, he didn't wait for questions. He didn't offer clarification. He simply gathered his notes, barely a page, gave a single nod, and walked away. Now here's where things start to twist. Because in typical royal fashion, the media outlets scrambled for framing. Some softened the blow, royal family reaches agreement on future titles. Others leaned into it harder. William draws line in the sand. But no one really knew what had just happened. Not fully, because there was no precedent. Not for this. And especially not coming from William. He's not the one who breaks news. He's the one who manages it. Coordinates behind the scenes. Smiles where needed, stays silent where necessary. So why did he take the lead? And why now? Because if this was purely a family decision, an internal disciplinary gesture, it could have been released through the palace press office. Standard fare. But this was different. This was intentional visibility. And maybe even a warning. But to whom? To Meghan and Harry? To the public? Or to the institution itself? That's where this gets murky. Because just before William stepped up to that podium, insiders say a different version of the statement was being reviewed behind palace walls. One that reportedly included language like ongoing conversations and further deliberation. Then suddenly, it was stripped down, condensed, finalized, and William read it. No Charles. No palace communications secretary. No joint appearance. Just William. Which makes you wonder, was this really about royal protocol? Or was this personal? Because for all the talk of duty, decorum, and the dignity of the crown, there was a tone beneath his words that couldn't quite be hidden. Not bitterness, exactly, but weariness, like a man who had waited long enough. And that's the part that hit hardest for those paying close attention. Because for years, William had been the one holding the center. Even when Harry and Meghan left. Even after Oprah. Even after the Netflix fallout, the Spotify split, Spare. He stayed still. Stayed royal. Didn't bite. But this wasn't stillness. This was a pivot. A signal. And if you were watching closely, you could see it in the way his fingers tapped once against the podium just before he read the final line. A subtle, involuntary motion, like someone bracing themselves. Not for the words, but for what they would cause. Because he knew, he had to know, this wouldn't land quietly. Not in Britain, not in the Commonwealth, and certainly not in America, where Meghan and Harry have built their new orbit. But he said it anyway. And that's what makes this moment matter. Because if William, the careful one, the controlled one, was willing to own this decision publicly, then whatever pushed him to that point wasn't small. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't a disagreement. It was something larger, something he couldn't ignore anymore. Which leads us to the next question. Who else signed off? Because the statement mentions senior consensus. That's a specific phrase, not a vague gesture toward vague authority. That's a code. Within royal circles, senior consensus refers to a particular group, the core members of the working royal family who hold power over structural decisions. That means Charles, Camilla, Anne, Edward, and William himself. In other words, this wasn't a passive decision William simply read aloud. This was a vote. And what we're starting to piece together is that the meeting in which that vote took place wasn't scheduled, wasn't planned, wasn't even on the calendar. It was called. Urgently, quietly, and with a level of secrecy that suggests the stakes were higher than we've been told. Which begs the question, and I know it's uncomfortable, what did they discover? Because you don't revoke royal status from children lightly. You don't make that move unless you believe you must. And certainly not in a family as image-conscious as the Windsors. So what tipped the balance? That's what we'll start to uncover in the next chapter. But for now, let's stay in this moment a little longer. Because in the hours after William's announcement, something strange began happening. Former palace aides, retired protocol officers, even fringe insiders who usually keep to themselves, started speaking up. Not with gossip, but with grief. It's like watching history rewrite itself, one said. I never thought I'd see the day when children born of a prince would be denied. Another, more bluntly, this wasn't about the children. This was about her. And this was coming for a long time. That last line matters. This was coming for a long time. So maybe William's statement wasn't abrupt. Maybe it was inevitable. The final blow in a quiet war that had been building beneath the surface since before Harry and Meghan ever left. And maybe, just maybe, that war wasn't between Harry and his father, but between William and the woman he believes broke something sacred. And the titles? Collateral. But if that's true, we're only seeing the edge of something deeper. And in the next chapter, we're going behind closed doors, into the room where that vote took place. Because while William may have spoken first, he wasn't the only one with something to say. And someone very senior, reportedly tried to stop it. Tried and failed. The setting was never announced. No itinerary. No palace press briefing. No photos of arrivals or motorcades. But if you talk to the right people, the ones who've worked inside the firm long enough to know how things move when no one's supposed to be looking, a picture starts to form. It happened, they say, in a lesser-known drawing room at Sandringham. Not Buckingham. Not Windsor. Sandringham. A place steeped in tradition, but just remote enough for privacy. Just cold enough in tone to feel impersonal. Senior royals arrived discreetly. No security flurry. No entourage. The cars were spaced apart. The windows, dark. They weren't gathered for tea. They were there to decide something permanent. Now, the question isn't just who was there. We already know the senior working royals were summoned. Charles, despite reports of illness-related fatigue, joined via secure video link from Balmoral. Camilla arrived first, hours early, and came last, but carried with her a small leather case. The kind she always carries, but that this time seemed unusually weighted. Edward's role? Quiet. He's never been the loud voice in the room. But all eyes, we're told, were on William. Because it was William who called the meeting. And that's when everything started shifting. Because William doesn't summon votes. That's the monarch's domain. But Charles, whether by choice or strategy, deferred. Gave William the floor. And this is where the story changes shape. Because sources close to palace staff say William didn't begin the meeting by naming Meghan. He didn't speak of interviews, docuseries, or leaked messages. He opened with legacy. He spoke of George, Charlotte, Louis, and then of Archie and Lilibet. And according to a leak from someone present at Sandringham that day, this is the closest paraphrase of what he said. Titles are not gifts. They're guardianship. And when that trust is compromised, not just once, but repeatedly, we must choose between sentiment and survival. He wasn't angry. That's what made it more effective. He was resolved. That's what shook the room. Because William has always played the diplomat. He was the bridge. The brother who grieved in silence, smiled at crowds, and shook hands while flanked by cameras, even when the storylines swirling around him painted him as either too cold or too careful. But here, in this room, there was no mask. What followed, reportedly, was a presentation. Brief, structured, deliberately worded. Examples of media moments, edited for tone. Snippets of language used in contracts and proposals, subtle but layered. And then came the dossier. That's what it's being referred to as now, though whether it was a thick folder or a few discrete pages, no one's confirming. Only that it contained correspondences. From the Sussex side, about brand negotiations that allegedly leveraged the children's royal lineage. Not hypothetically, not by implication, directly. One line, quoted but not yet confirmed, read, Prince Archie is more than a title. He's a symbol. One that resonates in both America and Britain. That's market power. Now, we don't know if Meghan wrote that, or if it came from a manager, a PR rep, or a third-party brand consultant. But we know how it was received. Silence. Cold, biting silence. And then, Camilla spoke. Not with anger. With something closer to fatigue. We've protected them long enough. And that, according to those briefed on the meeting, is when the vote was proposed. But not immediately called. There was still one voice missing. Princess Anne. She hadn't spoken yet. She listened. Took notes. Asked no questions. And when all others had finished, William, Edward, even Camilla, she opened her leather case. Pulled out a single letter. It was handwritten. Cream parchment. Faded edges. And it was signed by Elizabeth R., the Queen. We don't know what it said, not word for word. But the tone, we're told, was one of caution. A grandmother's voice. Stern, but laced with sorrow. A passage quoted reads, Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, but forgetting often leads to danger. Especially when lineage is involved.